Alrighty, and we're on. So it's a pretty abrupt sort of entry point, but I'm here with Andrew Flynn.
Yes.
Yes, and Andrew Flynn is from Alchemical fightwear.
Correct.
Yes, and how this one came about, it was quite interesting. I think we might have been messaging on socials for a bit, but then you also sponsor Hope and Ari down here at Kumite, which is why if you're watching, you can see the beautiful green background. It was funny. Hope actually said to me, "Oh, you've done like a few podcasts here now." It's like, yeah, I feel like I'm part of the family.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, they're really welcoming.
Yeah. So, Andrew, obviously I want to talk about, the hemp geese and all this sort of stuff. And I think there's a cool little story there that we'll get to. But for people that don't know you, I'm sort of curious to explore, where you grew up, what life was like for you growing up, and then obviously, your foray into this accidental, fightwear company.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so, well, I'm a Kiwi. So I grew up in quite a remote rural environment, so on farms. And, I would say that was an incredible way to grow up. And I wouldn't swap it for anything. And, but it was there was lots of solitude, and I guess I became, in that environment, I became quite okay with just being by myself, which I still am okay with. And, I guess the other thing that maybe defined my upbringing was, so I was born and raised in a Christian environment, which kind of connects interestingly with my martial arts journey, because things might be different these days, but in those days and in the environment that I was in, martial artistry or anything from the East was not okay. Right? So it was just a distinction that was made in that religion, that if it was from another kind of religion or philosophy, then it wasn't to be explored.
So that's an interesting one. We're gonna explore this, right? Because I often talk about this idea that as we grow up, we're always given lenses in which to view the world, right? And so you've grown up in a faith-based background, and the lenses were quite what's the right word? Maybe apprehensive, of the unknown.
Yes, that's probably it.
Right.
It's more just that if it's not understood, then it's it's like, well, we just don't touch that.
Yeah. It's kind of an interesting one, because it's like in a lot of cultures, there's a real blurring of lines between what's cultural and what is religious or spiritual. Yes. So as an example, I think most people have seen Chinese lion dancing as an example, or dragon dancing and lion dancing, and those forms of things where, at Chinese New Year, they're celebrating, with the drums and the dancing and the big lion heads and all that sort of stuff. And most people would view that as like a cultural thing.
Yes.
But there are spiritual elements or faith-based elements that go behind it, in terms of what the original intention of the thing was for.
Yes.
Right. And yeah, it's kind of interesting from that perspective that, in one sense, people, if they just look at it from a cultural perspective, it's like, well, you can't not be okay with it, because then you'd be a bigot.
Yes, of course.
Right? But then from the other side, it's like, if you didn't agree with the spiritual aspects of it, then there's a conflict there, right?
Yes.
And I think you got to every individual has to sort of work out how they navigate through that, right?
I feel like in the main that attitude has probably evolved. The thing is that in my early 20s, I moved away from that type of religion, but for various reasons. I can go into them, but in a nutshell, it was more just I was destined to open my mind. I just know that that's where I was heading, and that environment was not conducive to that. And so I guess events just evolved over time that took me out of that, and then in time, I started to engage, interestingly, in martial arts, which for me, having the background that I did, was a really mind-opening experience. And so yeah, that was, I guess, like the transition, I suppose, from, born into something which I did believe, because there was no way not to when you're born into it, to then growing up and going, maybe there's a bit more to this, and then just leaving and going out and exploring, and then discovering that actually, some of those things that I was taught, they weren't correct. And, because, there was legitimately a book that I was came across back in those days that explained that martial arts, for example, would make you violent and angry. So, and I mean, now I know this is clearly not true. It was just somebody that didn't understand writes a book, but then people read that and go, oh, well, that must be true because you're from our religion. So there was a lot of learning, and I guess once I did discover the martial arts journey, then I was like, oh, well, actually, this is where I was meant to come to at this point in my life. And most of my family still practice the same thing, but and I'm totally fine with it. I don't have an issue at all with any religion, but I would accept all religions now, not just go, this is the only one. You know what I mean?
Interesting. Yeah, it's one of those ones where it's like when it comes to those lenses, it's like when you first get experience or experience something that is counterintuitive to what you've been told. It's like those first little cracks emerge on that lens, and it's like most people then question, well, is that lens correct? Have I just been believing the wrong thing? And it may not necessarily be the case that, because I think far too often we actually then go the opposite way, where we throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yes.
Like we get this exposure to something else and we go, well, that must mean that everything else that they've told me was wrong.
Yes,
right?
and I did that initially.
Yeah.
Wow. So initially I just chucked it all out. I threw it all away. But then with time and reflection, I was like, oh yeah, well actually, like, there are lots of good things actually still, but it's just I needed to move on and discover that.
Yeah, and that's where, like, I always like the idea that, where do you find truth? And it's like, well, truth is found in places where you're willing to test the boundaries and the limits of those ideas, right?
Yes.
And so it's like, and that's the only way that each individual is going to find their own truths, is by pushing themselves into those places where perhaps you don't want to go there because it's scary, it's unknown, right? Just like for people that do still might hold that belief that martial arts is going to make somebody a violent person, like that's actually like, I think there's millions of examples that are counterintuitive
of
to
the
that.
opposite. Yeah, exactly.
Like you put a bully into a martial arts studio, chances are they won't survive very long, right?
Exactly.
Because they end up getting bullied, and then they realize, oh, it's not nice to bully people. And quite often it could be like a transformational experience for them.
Yeah.
Just to go back to, growing up for you, right? So you mentioned you grew up on a farm, right? Did you have any siblings?
Yeah, 3 brothers.
3 brothers.
So my martial arts training was fighting brothers.
Fighting brothers. What was the pecking order? Which number were you?
Well, I was number 3.
Okay, so you're the youngest.
So I was 3 of 4. So I was 3 of 4. So I have 3 brothers. Yep. There was 4 of us. The younger one was kind of like maybe more connected with our mum, and so he didn't probably interact as much with us 3 older ones. But the 2 oldest used to pick on me, and so I didn't realize it at the time, but I was probably tougher than the average human, because they used to pick on me.
So any fond stories of getting picked on, or like any time that you got them back?
Oh, I mean, I don't know. One thing that pops to mind is that I just remember there were times where, for example, and this was not a situation where I was being picked on, but the eldest would just declare that he could beat the other 2 of us by himself, like if it was 2-on-1.
Yeah.
And we were like, let's go.
Yeah.
And so go outside just on the grass. We didn't have a training area, and we just scrap on the lawn.
What did your parents think about that?
Oh, they didn't care.
Yeah,
they're totally fine with it.
Oh, that's good.
Well, they probably didn't even know. I didn't even know if they knew. Like,
okay.
we were, like, my dad just worked his guts out all the time. Like, he was working pretty much all the time. Mum was also really busy, and so her main line was go outside. Yeah, okay. Like, if we were inside making trouble, it was like she'd just kick us out. And so once we're outside, then half the time nobody would have known what we were doing.
Mm. Do you think that that helped you guys to sort of resolve your own differences? So you learn very quickly, like, okay, if you keep fighting, everybody just ends up in tears, or somebody ends up in tears, right?
Generally. I mean, yeah, I guess so. I probably wasn't so aware of that at the time, but certainly with reflection, I think so. And it would have taught me things that I probably didn't realize.
Mm. Yeah, the only reason I ask that is because I've got 4 kids myself.
Oh yeah.
And so when they're fighting, like often now my default response is like, well, I want you guys to try and resolve it yourselves.
Yeah.
And if you can't, then I'll just punish all of you. Like, so then it's like, I'm the bad guy now. So you guys can work together as a team, and so that daddy doesn't have to get involved. Or if daddy gets involved, daddy just punishes all of you. And then
Oh, that sounds like a reasonable approach.
I figure like I got to give them some credit in the sense of like, if they can sort it out themselves and I don't need to, come in and mediate, then to me that's a win, because it's a funny thing with siblings is like trying to get them to understand that, hey, like there's these are your brothers and sisters that you'll never feel as comfortable with anybody else in the world, because you're exposed to them 24 hours a day.
Yes.
They're going to see the worst of you and the best of you. They're going to compete with you for whatever, the dumbest thing, like the last chisel, or you know what I mean? Like it's silly things like that.
Yeah.
Right?
It can be the most minute things.
Who can run up the stairs the fastest? Like, who can brush their teeth the fastest? And I'm like, hey guys, it's not actually a race to how fast you can brush your teeth. Like, who can actually brush your teeth the cleanest is probably the right way to look at it.
Quality.
Yeah, right? So, you sort of end up in this, and it's a hard one, because like as a parent, and any parent can attest to this, is like, when you try and reflect on, what is the right way to sort of assist your children, there's no right or wrong answer, and because they've all got their own personalities. Your relationships are like, I would say like my relationships with each of my children is different as well. It doesn't mean that I love them any differently. It's just for whatever reason, and obviously it could be due to age and maturity, like their own temperaments.
Yes.
How they respond to certain things is differently, but like, if at least I can get them to understand that, hey, and I often will say this to them, it's like, if you're lucky, you'll have daddy for half your life, right? But your brothers and sisters, you should have them for pretty much your entire life.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty powerful bond when you think about that.
Yeah.
And so if you guys can, think like a team or act like a team and realize that, you guys are different, but you can each help each other in different ways, then there's a lot of power in that in terms of, where that could take you guys in the future and in life, right?
For sure.
Yeah. When you sort of reflect on, like, what, if you don't mind me asking, like, what's your relationships like with your brothers nowadays?
Oh yeah, I mean we all get on fine. We don't see a lot of each other. They're all in New Zealand. I'm the only one who's moved away, and so I see them when I see them. My younger brother came and saw us. Came and visited last Christmas. I'm going back soon to see my parents. So yeah, it's but we're not close siblings, like in that sense. It seems like some siblings become best friends. We're not really like that, but we're all fine with each other.
Yeah, brothers is an interesting one,
Yeah.
like it's just like, I think it's just a more of a boy type thing, because even like with my brother, like, I get on great with him, but like it's not like I don't talk to him every day.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah.
Like I think boys are typically like that. Girls might be a little bit different because they just have a different kind of closeness. Like, and I see that, with my kids.
Yeah.
So then, when it came to schooling and things like that, what was that like for you?
So my primary school was just a tiny little rural school. There was maybe 40 students. It was tiny. And so we went there through to high school. Then high school, you had to go to town. And so that was basically boarding school, because you would go, we lived off the bus route. So you'd go into town on Monday, come home Friday night.
Yeah.
So staying there. And so that was, I mean, in those days I was relatively more social than I am these days. So I probably quite enjoyed that in a way, because it was a whole bunch of people that I didn't usually hang out with, that now I was hanging out with. And it was, it was interesting and often fun. And yeah, I was fine with that. But I guess, yeah, it was, I was probably, if I remember rightly, I think I was kind of like the only one in amongst my friends group who, for example, went to church every Sunday. And so yeah, I was probably a little bit, didn't maybe engage in friendships the same way that I saw other people engaging with each other. But that was partly because I was always a bit, I don't know how to describe, but just like a little bit unsure of, how would I say, like, I just felt like we were different because of that. And so I never really, and I also, funnily enough, you know, now I come and just scrap with people daily, but I don't really like conflict. And I don't want people to think ill of me. Like I would, you know, I quite like for people to like me. I guess that's normal. And so I didn't, but it always sort of seemed like if there's anything, kids can be pretty mean. And if there's anything perceived as being different, they will pick at it. It's like they'll grab that thread and start pulling it out. And so I guess maybe, now I'm just sort of maybe realizing this right now, I was just trying to avoid any kind of like, oh, he's different. Let's like pick on that. So yeah, I was probably a little bit standoffish. But again, I was fine with it actually. Like looking back now, like I've always been okay just with myself, and I still am. And so I guess that's how I got through all of that.
Yeah. And then when it came to like academics and things like that, were you a studious kid or?
I mean, at some point in high school, I discovered that there was a way where you could do as little as possible but get by and not work that hard. It makes me sound lazy, and I'm not lazy, but I think, you know, if I look at further on when I started studying engineering and I started to work while I was studying, I did a lot better at studying when there was an understanding of how that applied. And so I think at the point where I was like, oh, it's all just theory. And it's like, what is this even about? I wasn't that good at just going, well, just do it anyway. I just kind of was like, okay, well, I can do the least amount possible. I still passed, like I was smart enough to still pass everything. And so not gaining any attention. And yeah, I just went through high school like that.
Under the radar.
It's
not a bad way to
like never really in trouble, but also not doing my.
Yeah,
I could have done better. I could have done better. I definitely could have done better.
Yeah, I think a lot of people struggle with that link, you know, and trying to understand the context, and especially like where you feel like there's no practicality in what you're doing. It then becomes like, what am I learning this for?
Yeah. I guess I also maybe at some point I think I did realize that, as we will discover as we go on further in this and we talk about the business side of things, I like doing different things. Like I'm really, you know, I know for sure now that I'm just not a mainstream human, you know, like that's, like I will actively move away from the mainstream. And if you start trying to get me to go along with a mainstream idea, I'm resisting and I'm just going, no, thank you. Like I'll just
let me look into it.
Yeah. And you know, that has honestly served me well, I think, in many situations where I've opted out of things that I just was like, that's not for me. And so, that's, I guess, also part of, I was just kind of like, this is like just producing mainstream humans. Like that's sort of how I was looking at it. It's like, I want to do something different. But, you know, to be honest, I guess I did kind of give into it in the end. You know, I did engineering and I worked in engineering. But then ultimately, I was definitely looking for something more than that.
So, okay, so talk me through that. So you finish school and then it's like, okay, what are you going to do? And then you look through and you're like, okay, I'm going to go study engineering, or what happened?
Well, actually, so I guess I did set that path a little bit earlier than that, because I met a guy that bought a property near us when I was probably maybe 15 or 16. He was a civil engineer and he just decided to take a break from that. He bought a farm. And I chatted with him about what he did one time at like a party at a neighbor's house or something like that. And he was telling me about it. And I was like, oh, well, yeah, that sounds kind of cool. Maybe I'll try that. And so I just did. You know, I studied civil engineering and then started working, doing the kind of, actually just pretty much exactly the kind of work that he had done. And so that was how that began. But then, over time, as I progressed into that career, I suppose, and you discover that there's two things. One is that I don't want to look after someone else's money. and like eventually that's kind of just what you're doing. Like when I was managing projects, but when you're building stuff, lots of things can go wrong, and they do, and that costs money. And it's like, so then, and it might not be your fault. It might not be something you did. It could be something someone else did unwittingly, whatever. And so that was one thing. Don't want to look after someone else's money, especially because it becomes millions and millions of dollars. And I want to be able to do something that I want to do for myself. I don't want to just be, beholden to the man, I suppose. So yeah, it was that. Just over time, I just knew that I would work my way out of that. But in the situation that I was in, I was heading for the top. Like I was being groomed to be the CEO of that business. But I got to a point where I was like, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want the pressure. Like I don't really like to be stressed out. Like I manage my life in such a way as to reduce stress. And so like having a job that is constantly stressful, I'm not going to keep doing that. That's a pathway to a heart attack.
It's good that you recognise it early. There's these other dudes that just keep going till they have the heart attack, right?
Yeah, but I could just see it. Like I just noticed that I wasn't making the kind of healthy choices in my life that I want to, and I was just like, it's not going where I want to, and then subsequently, getting to the point that I'm at now, I'm like, oh yeah, like this is what I was meant to be doing. So I guess that was how it was meant to turn out.
Yeah. So, when it came to the martial arts side of things, then, so when did you first come across martial arts in your life?
So I would have been in my mid-20s. So I had moved away from the Christian scene, and I made a new group of friends at that point. So I sort of was like, because like not being involved, it was never going to be that I would still have the same friend group. And so I made a new bunch of friends. And one of them was a guy he was quite a character, and he had been involved in a couple of styles of martial arts, and he would sort of like, maybe you're at a party or whatever, and he would start, picking on me. Not picking on me. He was just playing around. But he was like, oh, you should train martial arts. You'd love it. I was like, oh yeah, okay. Well, I had been interested, but as I said, it was forbidden. And so I was like, okay, well, what should I do? Like, what would you think is the best martial art for me? And he said, oh, Tai Chi Chuan, 100%. I was like, oh yeah, okay.
Was it a Chinese guy or what?
No, he wasn't at all. He was a European Kiwi, but I don't know, he must have known something. Like I guess I would say that was intuitive, because it did turn out that it was just right for me at that time, and I really didn't know anything about it. It was, if you had have asked me at that point, what is it? I would have said, oh, maybe like old people do it at the park, like slow motion movement. And that was really all I would have known. But then actually, I should go into more detail. So when he said that, then I was like, oh, well, I'll see if I can find someone teaching it. And just happened to be browsing like the local newspaper, the one that just gets delivered to your house, and there was just a little ad with just Tai Chi Chuan lessons, phone number, like no name or anything like that. And I was like, oh, okay, let's try that.
It's a sign.
yeah. And so called the number. There's a really heavy Chinese accent, says hello. And I'm like, oh, I'm interested in the Tai Chi lessons. There's a bit of a pause. Someone with better English comes on the phone and says, oh, you want Tai Chi? And I was like, yeah. And I was like, okay. Gave me the address, the time, and the day. And I was like, okay. And so I turned up, and it was a lady who was pretty recently moved from China. She was teaching Tai Chi Chuan, and at the classes she had an interpreter, so someone that had really good English. And so I started learning, and was like immediately quite hooked. Like I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And she started with just like a generic, I guess it's like a generic wushu kind of form, sort of like the for want of a better term, the dumbed down kind of version, which they produced when they were trying to take all the martial arts out of it, which was, I think, initially had been maybe a government initiative. And then, but once a few of us were sort of really keen, and she's like, oh, like, if you really want to learn, then we don't do that one, we do this one. And I was like, okay. And so
here's the real stuff.
Yeah, that's right. And so it happened to be Wu style Tai Chi Chuan, and so that's generally considered to be one of the three most known styles. You have Chen, Wang, Yang, and Wu style, and I didn't know anything about what that meant at the time. I did come to discover that people established within Tai Chi Chuan were quite maybe religious about their style, you know what I mean? Or like, our style's better. It's a little bit, and I was very accustomed to that because I'd come from this background where it was like, our religion's the only one, it's like, and so I knew all about that, and I was like, I don't care. Like, I don't care you do Chen style.
Just teach me the damn thing.
I'll just learn this one, And so, so started learning that, practicing every day, going to the teacher's house like almost every day to train with her. And probably at that time I was probably spending an hour to 2 hours a day training, and that was primarily just the form. So initially just the slow moving form, and then after some time she taught the fast moving form, which was something that most people don't even know exists, and then a little bit of the combat drills. And then ultimately, she was like, well, if you really... her English got better too, by the way. We used to hang out with her quite a bit. And so she'd go, after we've been doing that for a couple of years, we could have conversations, know. And she was actively trying to learn English. And so that was pretty cool. But anyway, at a certain point, she was like, well, if you really want to experience, like the pinnacle of this, it's like, I don't have that. You have to go to China. I was like, okay, I'll go to China. So went over and spent some time in Shanghai, and would go and train every day, 5 hours a day with this master that she sent us to see. Myself and one other guy went the first time, and he was awesome. Like, the kind of like the things that I see. Okay, little tangent, but a lot of people in the Jiu Jitsu world, MMA world, and that will just laugh about Tai Chi Chuan, say that's fake martial arts. You got, it's all over McDojo life, and I understand why people see it like that, but this guy was the real deal, and it's like you just couldn't do anything. Like it would be like sparring with Ari, like it's like you just, anything that you tried to do, it was like he was already there first. And I watched him train also with some of his senior students, and like just with the slightest movements, he could just like, and they would just go flying. Like, and so I was like, oh, like I couldn't understand what I was seeing. Like with my own eyes, I was like, how does he do that? It's like, and he was just showing us. He was like you'd just see, like they'd be in contact, and he would just turn his hand like that, not even with any kind of seeming power or force, and the guy would just go boop, it would just pop away, like in the air. So like he would, because they would be in form, and so his body would maintain its whole shape. He would just go flying through the air several meters, land, skid and bounce, and then he would just run back and they'll carry on. So they didn't have mats. This is on concrete at the park. So there was no safety net if you fell. So he was pretty careful with us. But and I never saw anybody fall. But I guess it was, it was quite an experience. It wasn't like going to train with monks at a monastery, but it was just, that was the park where his master used to go and train and teach. And so he was just doing that. He was just following in his footsteps.
I think, for people that might be interested to look at it more, like there's actually like a pushing hands competition.
Oh yeah.
And if you watch those pushing hands competitions, you do get to see like the supposed best Tai Chi guys, pushing hands essentially, and the whole game, the whole aim of the goal or the goal of the game is to destabilize your opponent.
Correct.
Right. And so how you do that, it's kind of like, I guess, you know, if you sort of think about sumo without the big fat guys, right? And they're not necessarily, they're not really pushing. They're more like planted into the ground as opposed to trying to push each other,
Correct.
you know, and using those driving forces. They're trying to destabilize people by being rooted into the ground and then trying to find those opportunities to sort of off balance your opponent, right? And yeah, like some of the movements can be quite fine, and it's kind of interesting when you bring up the Tai Chi thing because I think it's also was it the guy that wrote the art of learning? I think that's Josh Waitzkin.
Yes, he was a
Tai Chi guy as well, right?
Yeah.
And you know, again, it's one of those things that like you know, we were saying earlier is that people, you know, throw away everything that's to do with that art just because there are some negative things associated with it or some, you know, so one thing might test your ideal. Like, yeah, of course, if you go to a Tai Chi guy and you go, you know, I want to fight you in a Jiu Jitsu rule set, well, he's going to lose because that's like going to a basketball player and saying, mate, let's play soccer, right? Like it's a totally different sport, right? Yeah. So, you know, like so if you go to an MMA guy and you say, hey, you know, let's go and play soccer, like but he's an MMA guy, like, yeah, what do you expect, right? So it's the same thing when you go to a Tai Chi guy, unless he's professing that he can fight and that's what, you know, it allows him to do. Well, no, chances are it's more like he's probably got a guy with very good proprioception. He knows how to like control his body. He knows how to breathe. And if he practices, you know, pushing hands, then he probably knows, you know, how to off balance people. And use some of those movements. But like if you go and ask him to put on a choke, he's going to be just like any other white belt that walks into the gym.
Well, the thing about it also is that the reality is that there are people who are fake as well, and unfortunately, the format of that martial art lends itself a little bit to people being able to kind of fake it. And so, you know, that's part of the problem. Like when you come here and you do jiu-jitsu, there's no faking anything on this mat. It's like it doesn't even matter what color your belt is.
Yeah,
it's
people
just,
know when you.
It's just whoever submits somebody. Like that's, you know, like, and so there's just no room for it to be fake. And whereas and the part of the reason why there are fakers is because the journey to being exceptionally good at it is so arduous that most people will never get there.
Yep.
And so, you know, in that regard, I understand why it gets this reputation that it does. And I honestly don't care. Like, I know what it does for me. I know what I get from it. I still use it. And it's, you know, it's really good for me.
Yeah.
Let me just put it that way.
Well, it depends on your goals.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, like if your goal is, you know, you want to be the best fighter in the world, like, you know, like let's just use that as a stupid goal. Well, like, you know, the best fighters are probably going to be MMA guys, right? Let's just be real because they're the most well-rounded, right?
Yes.
But then at the same time, you know, like we've seen it before where people get a bit culty about it and they say, no, boxing's better than MMA. And we've seen what happened, you know, when James Toney or Butterbean, you know, went and tried to compete in MMA. You sort of see what happens. And you like there's been those sort of freak show matches, you know, Muhammad Ali back in the days and fighting against Inoue in that wrestling versus boxing match, and you just got his knees kicked out by a guy that just sat on lay on the ground, right? You know? Yeah,
that's it. Well, it really is, because you mentioned it before. It comes down to rule set.
Yes.
And, you know, I guess, you know, if you want to talk about Tai Chi Chuan as like the martial art, the ultimate achievement is when, and this is in the teachings of it, like there's, Jiu-Jitsu doesn't really have much in the way of like written, what would you say? I don't know, like textbooks maybe. Tai Chi Chuan has like
manuals,
or like certainly within my style, I've got multiple books that go into like the slow form, the fast form, pushing hands, and the ultimate, the stated ultimate goal is to go beyond technique and not require any technique at all, right? And so at that point, and this is what I did experience in China, was that once he put his hands on you, it was finished because you couldn't do anything. Like It was like by putting his hands on you, he could be as heavy as like a building on you or as light as a feather, depending on what you did. And so he was beyond the technique. It's like he didn't need to use a technique. He could just manipulate you and just make you go down to the ground, you know, or like spin you around or send you out, you know, like it was. And so, you know, and at the time, to put it in context, at that time, I was a 20, like I was a strong, I'm not a big dude, I'm 75 odd kilos, but I was a strong, I grew up on a farm, you know, we did farmers' carries with buckets of milk, you know, like like we were strong kids. And so I was a 20-something-year-old strong human that that had a little bit of training. And he was like my dad's age. He would have been 65, about my size, quite big for a Chinese guy, but like didn't matter. Like honestly, it just didn't matter at all. He was just like, as far as I was concerned, I couldn't do anything. I could only do what he let me. And most of it was just drilling. He was just helping us to make the right movements, to be in the correct place, like understand body positioning, because that's what it's really all about. So, and you know, the thing that he demonstrated, which is also a stated goal of it, is that you learn how to connect completely from your feet to your hands so that you can effectively bring the power of your entire body to your hands. So that if you think about, okay, like for example, if you tried to stand still, but I was allowed to barge you with my shoulder, well, of course I'm going to knock you back because, you know, that's like me putting my mass against you. But he could just do that with his hands, with a soft touch. He could put his whole body against you, and you couldn't enter his space. And if he wanted to, he could just push you away at any moment. So, you know, and that kind of just blew my mind a little bit. And I was like, okay, but you know, when I came back, I went again a couple of years later, but I had no training partners, and I didn't feel like I could teach. I was a beginner, like really, even after 5 years, I was a rank beginner. And so I didn't feel like I could teach anyone anything meaningful because I was still trying to learn myself. And I was like, but I just need more combat training. You know, I kind of understand the principles of this a little bit. I have a little bit of a feel for it, but I need more combat training. And that's when I met Jiu Jitsu.
So 5 years of Tai Chi, then you started Jiu Jitsu.
Yeah.
Do you remember where you first trained?
Yeah, I do. Absolutely. It was so this was still in New Zealand. We're in 2010. And there was a kickboxing studio in the local town. It was like 15 minutes away.
So, and whereabouts in New Zealand?
Oh, okay,
did you live? Yeah,
sure.
Sorry, I forgot to ask that.
So this is in the north of the North Island. So we're talking like a couple of hours north of Auckland.
Okay.
Originally, I was on the west coast. That's where I grew up. It was really remote out there, but in the, you know, grew up there, moved away, studied, worked. Then at this point, I'd come back and I was helping my parents out with, they had avocado orchards at the time.
Wow.
And so they had moved sort of like more sort of central, away from the coast a bit, but they were close to a town. And so we were just living there on the property. And I don't even know how I became aware of this, but somehow, maybe again it was in a local paper or whatever, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu lessons at the Roundhouse Kickboxing Studio, it was called. It doesn't exist anymore. There was a bit of stuff went down there, but
I'm curious on that story too.
I only heard about that afterwards. But and so what had happened was that a lady who had her blue belt at the time had moved to town from Auckland for her work, but she still wanted to train. She'd been training jiu-jitsu at a club in Auckland, which was under John Will. I'll tell a story about that in a minute. And she wanted to train, so she's like, well, I'll teach. And she was really good, like for the time that it was, and a lady with just blue belt experience. She was decent, like she was good. And so there was like sometimes 10 of us maybe coming to a class. And I think it might sound a little bit weird, but so it sort of really hooked me when like she did stuff like I had no idea, for example, what a triangle choke was. And we were sparring, and I thought that I was passing her guard, and then my head and arm is stuck between her legs, and my faces like that. I'm like, what's going on here? And the next minute I'm choking, and I'm like, okay, all right, tapping out. I was like, what the hell? And I was like, okay, there's like all kinds of sneaky things going on here that I need to know about. And so I was pretty hooked by that stage. And I trained there with who I'd done probably, I'm going to say maybe a dozen lessons. And she says, like our, head honcho is coming from Australia to do a seminar in Auckland, like you should come. I was like, oh yeah, okay, sure. And it was John Will, who, most people here will know John Will. And so we went down, and there was a lot of people there. Like, we're talking, this is 2010, and there was probably at least 40 people at this seminar. And I didn't know, but someone had organized his travel, and they'd messed it up a little bit, and he was running a bit late when he got there, and he was, not that he was flustered, but he was a little bit frustrated. And so once we started, he was teaching basically Das and Anaconda variations, and I knew nothing. Like, we hadn't even covered anything like that in class. I didn't know anything about it. And he picked up on that pretty quickly, and he started to single me out. And like at one point, partway through the seminar, he stops and he's just kind of looking down at me, trying to do what he told us to do. And then he just says in a big loud voice, "Have you ever been on the ground before?" And I was like, oh man.
He's been called out by John Will.
Yeah, I know. I was like,
the guy that doesn't want to have any confrontation, trying to fly under the radar.
Exactly. And I just sat there, and I looked up at him, and I was like, you know what? Not really. And he just walked away. But then, like, for the rest of the seminar, just any time that he came past, he'd take the piss out of me. But I didn't mind. Like, I knew that I was
fresh.
I knew where I was at, and I was like, that's fine. And the lady that was training us afterwards, I think she sort of picked up on it. She was like, "I'm so sorry. He was kind of mean to you. Like, he's not usually like that." I was like, "That's fine. Don't worry about it." So anyway, but I stuck with it, and I've never seen John Will again, but. Maybe one day I will.
Oh, black belt now.
Yeah, I made it. I made it.
Yeah. Huh? That white belt that never gave up.
Exactly, that's it. Despite your treatment of me, I stuck with it.
Your encouragement. Maybe that's why you stuck with it. Despite it, right? Like,
yeah. So anyway, that was pretty cool. But then, I went, trained a bit more with her, and then I moved over here. So that was in 2011. And
so what sparked the move?
Oh, work.
Oh,
yeah.
really?
So I'd moved back to work with my parents, helped them out for a while, and then I sort of felt like I needed to go back to my career job for a bit, and so there was a lot of work opportunities here. There wasn't so many back home. And so I came over, and ultimately I was coming to then set up a business for the company that I had worked for quite a bit there. They said, well, start us an Australian business. And so I did. And I just started that. That was 2011. At first, there wasn't, like these days, I joke these days that you have a jits club for every Macca's pretty much. Like we literally, Noosa is where we're based these days. And there are 4 clubs in Noosa, and it's not a big town. So there's a lot of jiu-jitsu. There wasn't then, they were just starting to pop up on the Sunshine Coast. Like there would have been one in Caloundra then, but I didn't really know about it. Then there was a guy coming from Brisbane up the coast a bit and doing lessons. I was driving and training with him a bit. And then I was walking through the mall in Noosa one day. This is early 2012, maybe January. And there was a stall there with a couple of guys sitting out, a big sign saying Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I was like, oh, I do that. I was like, so I walked over. I said, oh, what's going on here? And they said, we're starting a club in Noosa. I was like, oh, cool. I said, I'm coming. And so they said, all right, Saturday, whatever the date was, come. And they were opening the club. And, we were extremely fortunate. Like at that time, so this was actually in the days of Infinity Martial Arts, which I don't think exists anymore, but they were all opening clubs all around on the coast. They sort of opened quite a few pretty much at once or in quick succession. And most of those clubs didn't have a black belt instructor. So there was a black belt head instructor, Neil Owen was his name, an English guy. He's gone back to England now, but we became pretty good mates. But the guy who was the money for the Noosa branch, he wanted a black belt, and he had money, and so he arranged for who is now still my coach at Kaza, which is where we train because the Infinity closed, is Yoshi Hasegawa. He's a Japanese black belt. He trained under Hei Diogo, who's a Carlson Gracie guy, and then he also trained a bit in Brazil with Barbosa. That was when he got to black belt, and then he'd gone back to Japan, and then they brought him out here. And so we had a black belt coach, and so we were training in those days with a black belt coach every day, and that was, we were probably a bit spoilt because not everybody had that. And, and he was so good, like, 'cause again, it's like, you're talking jiu-jitsu, you couldn't do anything. He would just smash us every night, like literally smash us. We used to joke that he would watch us drilling and then just go, oh my God, and then just beat us up. It was like
frustration.
Yeah.
When are you guys
but,
going to learn?
we became tough, and that was, there's a few of us who obviously now have our black belts and are still training that were there day one, signed up, started, and still doing it.
That's a pretty amazing thing.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah,
it's cool. Yeah.
So then, okay, so you moved over for work, and then you never moved back. So what happened?
So yeah, I did that job. I started that business, and it was really successful. And as I think I said to you earlier, I was sort of being groomed to keep moving up in that business. But at some point, I was just like, I don't want to do this. And so I just pulled out. And I was like, sorry, guys, I'm done. And I bailed out of that. I took a little bit of a break. And then I was like, living here in Noosa, I had 2 young daughters that were in school. And so I was like, well, we've kind of settled here. I want to stay here. It's like, what's a good way? I didn't, up to that point, really infiltrate the local community that much because my work used to take me away quite a bit. And when I was home, I was just kind of home. And so I was like, well, I'll get a local business. And then in that way, I'll get to know people. And so I bought a cafe of all things. And I actually really enjoyed that while I was doing it. It was pretty hard. It's not that easy to make money at a cafe, but we got to the point, and my current partner, I separated during that kind of period from the mum of my daughters. But then I met the lady who's now my partner and business partner, and she had worked in hospitality all her adult life, and she had retrained now. She'd done a degree in nutrition, which is what she does now. But she's like, I'll come and give you a hand to get out of that. I was like, okay. She's like, but we're not. But yeah, well, because I was like, yeah, I think I kind of probably really want to sell this business, but I don't know if it's sellable. It doesn't. Yeah. At that point, it was going okay, but not amazing. And she was like, well, I'll help you get out. And I was like, okay. So we just spent a year working hard, making it better, and it was better, and it was really actually good. And we were making quite reasonable money by that point, but we'd agreed that we were getting out. Yeah. So we sold it.
Sorry, just on that note, because I'm a bit curious about, what were some of the things that you guys had to change in that year to improve that business, right?
Oh, yeah, sure. So, yeah, less staff costs. The 2 of us worked really hard. We reduced the number of staff down because that's the killer. With a business like that, you don't know who's coming on any given day. And we had a great local following, and when tourists came to town, we had a good reputation. But, on any given day, you could be staffed for it to be reasonably busy, but then maybe people don't come. Well, that's just chewing into your potential profits. So, we reduced the staffing a bit and did more work ourselves. We simplified a bunch of things to do with the food, and, we just worked hard. That's probably the main thing. We worked hard.
It's always interesting. There's no silver bullet, right? Everybody's looking for that. What was that quick fix? But the reality is hang on a second. There's a lot of moving parts here.
Yeah. There's no quick fix, but for sure, I would say that if you're going to do a business like that one, it is because there are plenty of cafes in most areas, and especially in Noosa. It's a bit of a popularity contest. You need to be seen as the place to go. And so as much as so everything you do's got to be great. You got to make good coffee, you got to have good food, but then you've also got to create the other elements of attraction that cause people to go, yeah, like that's just the place where we go, and they just come every day. And we had loads of those people, you know. And a guy that I was, for example, so a young Brazilian guy that was working for us at that time, after we sold that, he started his own one a little while after that, and he is smashing it. Like, they're doing so well, he and his partner, and you know, because he's smart, and he sort of watched and observed and saw, you know, how was the best way to do things. But also, he's a human magnet. Like, people just love him, and so in that regard, you know, so much of their popularity is just because they're just awesome people, and everybody loves them. So it's, you know, like it's kind of like that.
And it's a people business, right?
It is a people business.
Like,
yeah.
it's one of those ones, especially when you're in a town like Noosa, right? Like, you'd have your regulars. And so it's like, you know all of them by name. And like, once people are creatures of habit.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like, that's why people end up staying at the same jiu-jitsu gym for an extended period of time, is because you get used to the environment, you're comfortable, you know everybody.
Yes.
You know who's going to look after you, who you want to avoid.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And,
yeah, true. I mean, the thing was too that, you know, from doing that, it's like, you know, when anything that you train, you become better at. So I became really, really good at remembering people's names, because I cottoned on pretty quickly that if when somebody walked in, you said their name, they were coming back. And so we could do that even with tourists.
Yeah.
Like, you come in today, I say, oh, hey, you know, we chat a little bit, and I find out that your name's Johnny. Yeah. You come back tomorrow, and I'm like, hey, Johnny, how's it going? And you're like, he remembered my name. Like, you know,
do you have any tips on that? Because there are people that struggle with names. I sometimes struggle as well, just because like I meet so many people like on a regular basis, right? But I always remember the story. Like, if I've asked somebody about, you know, whether it could be something that they're into or what they do, and then like if I relate the name to the story, then it's a lot easier for me. You know, like, you know, so if I think about it as Andrew from Alchemical, what does Alchemical do? And then I've got like a little bit of a script that goes through my mind in terms of, okay, whenever I think about this person, this is what comes to mind. Yeah.
Well, I mean, in this case, you didn't really often have that. There, right? And honestly, I'm going to just say it was just intuition, because before that, I wasn't that good at it. And honestly, I'm not that good at it now that I don't do that. Yeah. It was just in that role, I could just see the face and the name will just come.
What if you get it wrong? You're saying it with such confidence.
No, because I just knew I was right.
Because like I could probably do that, and then I'd be like, I'm totally wrong. Like, it'd be I'd be like calling him Michael. You're now Michael in my mind, but I've said it with such confidence that you're now Michael.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't remember being wrong. But
well, people keep coming back, so they might have been like, "Oh, I love this cafe." You know, Andrew's always calling me X, Y, Z, but he says it so lovingly that I just feel like I got to go back.
Just put up with it. Yeah.
Did you used to write the names on the coffee lids or anything like that? That would help.
No, we didn't. No, we had a different system, but yeah. You're making me try and remember now. I can't remember. We changed the systems over time too, because when I first took it over, it was very manual. You wrote a lot of stuff in a book, but we put like a
point of sale machine.
Yeah, point of sale machine in, and did all that kind of thing. Yeah.
And so then, when it came, and I'm also curious about this because you know, some people that listen to the podcast are in business and things like that. But like, when it came to exiting that business, was that a difficult process? Did you guys sell it yourselves? Did you get a broker? Like, what did you?
Yeah, we got a broker. There was a lady who was formerly from hospitality, so she was pretty, you know, understanding of the industry and that kind of thing. And so, yeah, we got her to help us sell it. And, you know, she was great. Yeah, I guess, you know, we were fortunate. Some people came along who just fell in love with it, and, you know, they didn't last long, to be honest. It did close. They just didn't understand. Like, they were lovely people, and we were very, very open with them. You know, like we were like, these are, you know, we were showing them true numbers. It was all legit. But we're like, but we really work for this. Like, we're here every day, just about. You know, it was a 7-day thing. We did take days off, but, you know, we were very engaged in it. And we're like, if you want it to be successful, you're going to have to do that too. And people are going to need to like you. You know, like, it's as simple as that. And I didn't take too much notice. I just know because my friend who's now got his own place smashing it, he worked for them for a little while. Like, he was really kind to them. Like, he stuck around for a while to sort of help them out a bit. But ultimately they just didn't understand what was required. Yeah.
You got to have that drive too.
Yeah.
It's not easy, going into a business day in, day out. A lot of people think, I'm going to go in and I'll just do this business because it's something to do and it's better than working for somebody else. And then you realize it's more work because you're working for yourself.
Yes.
Right. And then not only that, a lot of the times, one of the advantages of working for somebody else is that it does give you discipline in the sense of like, it's more structured.
Yes.
When a lot of people, when they're in control of themselves, it's like, you got an assignment due, but it's due in 4 weeks and you don't do anything for 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you make excuses as well.
Because people are inherently where we lack discipline.
Yeah, that's true.
And so, that's a key reason why a lot of these things sort of do fail. I'm not saying that was the reason in this case, but...
Yeah, I mean, we're, to be honest, and because we... Obviously, my partner was in that scene for a long time, and then I dabbled in it with that business. But we've watched, over the years, millions of dollars get tipped down the drain in that town. People come, they spend $100,000, $200,000 fitting out a premises to start a new restaurant or cafe or whatever, and then, within 12 months, sometimes less, I've watched some be gone in 5 months. That in that case, I think they drank all the profits. Like they were basically next door to us, and these guys, they were wild. It was a restaurant. They took over another restaurant, and they spent quite a bit doing it up. It was a grubby little place, and they made it really nice, but they were heavy drinkers, and we opened at 6 for the early coffee drinkers, so we were there from 5:30, and we closed at 2, and so we would be there, get there at 5:30. 6 o'clock, open the doors, and these boys would roll in for coffee, and they'd been drinking all night next door. And it's like, oh my goodness, how long is this going to last? And sure enough, within 5 or 6 months, it was gone.
It's a tough one. Yeah.
So there's a lot of people, they think they've got a dream. Maybe they do have a dream, but maybe they don't have the discipline or the wherewithal to enact it. You know, because it's one thing is for sure that if you're going to have your own business, there are going to be many challenges that you didn't foresee, and then once you solve those, there will be more.
Absolutely, yeah, and
that's pretty much that.
Yeah, well, it's always the case, right? And bigger problems means bigger profits, but can you handle those bigger problems?
Yeah, right? That's it. And so but I guess during the course of my career and coming here and establishing a business and then having my own little business, like I've been continuously learning, and so now that we have this new one, I think we're a lot smarter just generally in terms of business, even though it's a new thing that we didn't have a background in. That we didn't anticipate.
So you exit the cafe business, and then what's the sort of timeline? Like, what were you doing between then and then before starting Alchemical?
So for a while, my partner was working for a mate of ours who was running resorts. So she was kind of like managing a resort for a bit. And I went back to doing consulting work in the engineering field for a bit. We just kind of did that for a little while, and she was working out how to do her health stuff. So she was now a clinical nutritionist, wanting to be doing that, but just not quite knowing how to launch that. And so then little by little, she started to build that aspect. So I guess we were sort of kind of becoming a health business, I suppose you might say. And, a couple of iterations into it, we got to Alchemical. And then it really was, we do joke sometimes that we're the accidental fightwear business because we didn't plan to have that business. It was really... I wanted a hemp gi just because I like different things. And I was like, somebody must do hemp gis, And so I started hunting, and I discovered that you could get them out of the States. There was a few brands in the States doing them, but they were quite expensive, especially once you converted currency and paid for shipping. It was like a $450 gi. And I was like, I don't do that. Like I never spent much money on gis. Like for example, I've had one shoya roll gi in my life, and that's only because Yoshi gave it to me. Like, he's sponsored by shoya roll, so he was like, one day he's like, Andy, you want this gi? I was like, sure. So I had a shoya roll gi.
Not a bad gi to get.
And it was, that's the only one I ever had, and to be honest, it wasn't different than any other gi I had, and it just had shoya roll on it. And so,
all right, Cheryl, if you want to sponsor me, don't worry about Andrew. I do not mirror these views necessarily. Okay, yeah, let's go.
But I'll come back to that point. But so, yeah, I wanted a hemp gi, but they're really expensive, and I was like, well, if you can get them, then somebody must be making them. And so I started hunting, and I figured they probably got made in China. So I jumped on Alibaba and started searching, and I discovered very quickly that people say they do things that they don't. So like, you'd start a conversation with somebody because their ad says they make hemp gis, and then you discover once you've got partway into the process that they don't actually make them. And so then I worked my way through multiple of these interactions.
Jeez, that's painful.
Yeah, it was. But I was quite persistent. And I then found another ad saying, hemp gis. And so I messaged, and I said, oh, do you actually make hemp gis? By this point, I'm skeptical. And he comes back and goes, yeah, we do. I was like, oh, cool. Can I get one? He's like, yeah, we'll make you a sample. Do you want logos or anything on it? I was like, yeah. So I sent him our artwork, sketched where I wanted it. And a month later, I had a hemp gi on my doorstep, costing maybe a little over half what it was going to cost me to buy one out of the States. And so I was like, oh, well, I could just settle for this, but maybe I'll try again. And because it had a heavy jacket, so basically all of our competitors make hemp gis with a really heavy jacket. It's like 575 GSM. We also make those typically for the colder climates, but it's pretty heavy, and in warm climate in summer it's kind of hot, and we're in the warm. And so I was like, I want to make a lightweight one. And he's like, yeah, these are the only fabrics we can get. It's not that easy to get hemp fabrics. And so I said, well, what about if we do one where you make the jacket from the pants fabric? And he's like, oh yeah, I can do that. I was like, sure. So
nobody had ever asked that guy.
Yeah, nobody ever asked. Like, so because nobody had asked, and they don't suggest, you have to just ask the right question. And then when you ask the right question, they're like, oh yeah, well, we could do that. And then you get somewhere. And so he made another sample. This time it was a black one, and it was with a lightweight jacket. And again, about a month, it was on my doorstep. And this was even better. And I was like, oh man, this is so good. We've just got to have more of these. And so we rallied around our friends and training partners, like, anyone want to buy a hemp gi? A bunch of people put money down. We're like, let's do it. We had to do 100. I think we pre-sold almost 30. And we're like, okay, let's go for it.
Yeah.
And so we did. We did a production run, and they were awesome. And we're at that point. And a friend of mine who was training on the Gold Coast, Yasmin Sheriff, she contacted me and was like, oh, I love hemp stuff. I've had hemp belts. And I was like, I'd love a hemp gi. I was like, I'll send you one. You can just have one. Just tell people how cool it is. And so I sent the gi. She loved it. And then she's like, but what about no gi? Yeah, like, do loads of no gi. And I was like, like, I don't really know. I hadn't even thought about it. And so I went back to the factory and I said, we want to make no-gi gear. Like, what can you do? Like, we don't want to use polyester. He said, that's all we do. I was like, okay. Well, again, then you start asking the questions. I said, so what if I got some other fabric and sent it to you? He goes, oh yeah, no problem. I'll make rash guards. And I was like, okay, cool. So then I'm back on Alibaba hunting for fabric suppliers. And it turned out we had some hemp and organic cotton T-shirts made. And so I went back to that same person and I said, oh, like, can I get fabrics from you? And she said, yeah. I said, I want something, hemp and organic cotton with some spandex. It's got to be stretchy. And she's like, oh, yeah, we've got that. I was like, okay. And so she organised a sample of that to go to the factory, made a couple of rash guards and sent them to us. But it was 220 GSM. This is like the way you talk about the weight of fabrics. And
it's as thick as a T-shirt. 220 GSM.
Yeah, well, yeah. But in actual fact, it would seem like being as thick as a T-shirt would be fine, but it was so strong. It was like a compression shirt. So when you put it on, you felt like you were being squished. And I was like, oh, wow. I was like, this is like, it's too much. So I went back and said, like, we need to go lighter. So we went from 220 down to 200, did another sample of that, and was like, okay, that's perfect. It was amazing. And so we bought a minimum order of that. So we had then fabric to make natural rash guards. And we're sort of trying to figure out the shorts side of it. I was like, well, what about just the fabric that we make the gi pants from, the hemp fabric? And so I went back and said, well, can you make us shorts, just do a sample in your standard grappling shorts pattern that you have with the hemp fabric that you make the gi pants from? And he said, yeah, no problem. So he made some, and they were really cool. So then we were like, okay, we're doing no-gi stuff. And so and it just kind of kicked off from there. And you know, we got some bamboo fabric as well, so we've done some bamboo rash guards, and so we've kind of got like 2 versions of rash guard. Our new shorts that we've been doing are hemp and organic cotton blend. They're lighter, like that fabric was like over 300 GSM. We got it down to like about 250, and yeah, they're amazing. They're so comfortable and nice to train in, and yeah, like they're really growing in popularity too. Like we've got a growing customer base of people that just rave about it. Like they send us messages like, oh my God, you guys are the best. You know, like I've been looking for this, you just couldn't get it. It's like, you're the only ones. And like, yeah, we know, because we literally are. And yeah, so then we're doing no-gi stuff.
So, okay, to go back to, what was the fascination on the hemp gi? Like, why did you want a hemp gi over, like, you know, there's plenty of cotton ones available, there's plenty of brands available. Like, why did you have this fascination with having a hemp gi?
I mean, honestly,
stoner culture in in jiu-jitsu.
Stoner culture, yeah. I mean, it was. I think all I could say was that somehow I seemed to understand. I don't really know how, but I seemed to have some knowledge in me that hemp was stronger and more breathable, which it is. I don't know. And I don't really know how I knew that. I'm not actually too sure where that came from. And then I was just, and honestly, it was kind of just one of those things where I just had the thought one night, and I was like, oh, I want a hemp gi. Like, it just kind of came to my mind, and then I started searching for it. And like when
had you been ripping your cotton ones or anything?
No,
like,
well, I mean, I had torn a few, but it wasn't so much that. It was also that. So hemp has this incredible quality where it softens with wear, and so we don't, unfortunately, because we have to wash our gi every time we use it, we don't quite get the benefits of that. Like, for example, just that black bag over there, that's my bag. There's a black hemp bag sitting on top of it with our logo and stuff on it. So that bag gets occasionally washed. But other than that, I'm just using it all the time. And it's like a baby's blanket. But when you wash clothing all the time, like, you know, every time you use it, it gets a natural kind of stiffness to it. And so that's the thing that really happens with the cotton gis, which also happens to a slightly less extent with the hemp ones, but they get stiff. And it's like they also accumulate the mind blank, the washing, the detergents and the like. So those can accumulate in the fabric, but it's just a function of the washing all the time, and they just go crusty, you know. And the hemp takes longer to go crusty.
Oh, really?
Than cotton.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think everybody would have noticed. You know, it's like with your, you know, when you get a brand new towel and it's nice and soft.
Yes.
Then, you know, after it's been through the wash for a month or two, and then suddenly it's like you hang it up to dry.
Yes.
And you pull it down, it's still holding the shape of like things almost like stiff like cardboard, right? That's what you're referring to, right?
That's pretty much what I'm talking about. But what we also discovered was that the hemp fabrics, especially the lightweight, it doesn't shrink as much. So I had been, as I said, I didn't really spend a lot of money on gis. I was usually looking for a deal. And so I had been wearing quite a bit of tatami gis, and I had tried a couple of Browse ones. They happened to be 2 brands that shrink the most. Like, they shrink like crazy. And so I would buy A2, sometimes even A2L, and I'm an A1 size human, because by the time they finish shrinking, they'll be the right size.
Yeah.
And so we discovered that the hemp doesn't shrink as much. And so you can check them in the dryer, and they don't. They sort of have a shrinkage that they do, and then that's it. And so if this is, you talk about the towel, when you wash a towel, especially in a front loading machine, different with top loaders, it like compresses the pile, like all of the
fluffiness,
compresses it all. And if you stick it in the dryer, it fluffs it. So we just wash our gis, hang them to dry, and when they're just a little bit damp still, we just bang them in the dryer to finish them off, and they stay like incredibly soft and comfortable. So you sort of like get around that crustiness.
Yeah. So then, you know, I want to go down the rabbit hole of like the potential benefits of using more natural products, right?
Sure.
So to preface this, right, like Andrew sent me like this Word document with a whole bunch of links, and because you know part of the reason and I guess the value proposition of Alchemical is you're trying to reduce your exposure to synthetic materials like
Correct.
polyester, things that are essentially, and I wasn't, you know, well, I would say I probably knew it in the back of the mind, but you don't really think about it, you know, that your compression gear is typically made of like petrochemical stuff. It's byproducts of petrochemicals that they turn into synthetic polymer.
Yes.
And they use that synthetic polymer to obviously create the materials that you wear.
Correct.
Right?
I can tell you all about that, by the way, if you want.
Let's go down the rabbit hole because I think this is pretty interesting.
I've been deep down that hole. I got lost for a few days.
who pulled you out?
Managed to extract myself, but yeah, it's a deep hole.
Okay, so let's talk about that, right? So, and I guess, you know, on that note, right, I'm a bit curious as to whether your partner had any influence on that, because obviously being a nutritionist, right, she looks at the world through that lens of how food impacts your body.
Correct.
And, you know, how nutrition and diet and all those sorts of things can lead to illnesses and that side of things. And it was that, like, what was the catalyst? Was it that made you start looking into things, or what was it?
Well, okay, yeah, I mean, she would have definitely been an influence in the sense that, so she studied in Sydney, her degree, and she had a mix of things in her wardrobe, some of which were synthetic, and she found in the cooler climate here she didn't notice it, but when she moved up north into the warmer climate, she's like, I can't wear this synthetic clothing. So she sort of, I guess, gained some personal awareness of the lack of breathability of the polyester, which is less apparent in a colder climate. But that, yeah, so I guess that was her little like mini journey, I suppose. And I myself, so I also surf, and I've literally never worn a plastic rash guard to surf in. You'd find that most experienced surfers would just wear a t-shirt. If they're going to wear a shirt of some kind, they'll just wear a cotton t-shirt. You don't see that many experienced surfers in plastic rash guards generally. But once I started doing Jiu Jitsu as a white belt, I bought a plastic rash guard to compete in, and then I never bought another one because I was just like, that is gross. And I would wear a t-shirt. So I was one of those t-shirt guys. Yeah.
So,
there's a lot of gorilla hands, like word.
There's a lot of wrestlers that do that. I noticed that a lot of wrestlers just wear those. You know, just wear a cotton t-shirt.
Yeah,
and it does get annoying sometimes, like if your fingers or your toes get caught in it. Yeah,
well, Yoshi's banned them now. That he got his fingers caught in somebody's t-shirt one time, and nearly broke them. So he made a rule that you do have to wear a rash guard. Yeah. But obviously now we have natural ones, so it's fine. But yeah, up to this point, I was a t-shirt guy. And sorry, where were we going with that? Yeah,
so you bought a plastic rash guard, and
that's right. Yeah. And so anyway, and I didn't get another one. So get me back on track.
So I guess, like, what made you start thinking about, how these materials can obviously impact your health and things like that?
Well, I mean, I'm going to be honest and say that I didn't really look at that too hard until we started making the Nogi gear, because that sort of really highlighted it. I think, I sort of said that I bought one as a white belt and I didn't get another one, but that was kind of, it was just my feeling, but I never verified it by looking at the data. I just was like, I just don't like it. I just didn't like it, so I didn't do it. But once we started making the natural gear, I was like, okay, so why? Like why does our natural stuff feel so much better than a polyester one? And so I started to investigate and look into it, and discovered that there were, for example, there's a lot of sort of like marketing speak that goes into things, obviously, and so people will call polyester breathable and moisture wicking and these kinds of things, which is just an outright lie. Like, it is not that. It can't, because the reason why it can't is because so let's just talk about the difference, for example, between a polyester fiber and a hemp fiber. So a polyester fiber is, as you said, it's a petrochemical product. So what they do is they get crude oil out of the ground and then they fractionate it. What that basically means is they split it into portions. Some of it's diesel, some's petrol, some is able to be turned into plastics, and some of it's, paraffin and, kerosene, and you have all these different fractions of the crude oil. I definitely didn't just name them all, by the way. There's lots more. But so what that means is that the fraction that can be turned into plastic, they take that, they polymerize it, and then under heated conditions, it's a liquid, and then they start to extrude the fibers. So they just draw the fibers out through a process. And those fibers are, how would you say? Like, they don't have any texture. They're just like a perfect
extrusion,
long extrusion, like a wire, like how you would imagine like a wire, how it's just perfect. And so, they're like, in that regard, it makes them very uniform. They are very strong and durable, and they're long fibers, that's part of what makes them strong. So I'm not saying that everything to do with them is negative, because they are awesome for quick drying stuff and they're durable. But then once you start to go into all the other things, that's where you hit the snags. And so there's no absorption into that plastic fiber, whereas a hemp fiber is porous, has lots of tiny microscopic little spaces and holes through it. So that's what gives it breathability and absorption. So that's why it can wick away moisture, it can absorb, and it can, breathe. And so the real crux of the matter there is that if you're talking about, for example, the breathability, is that your skin is like a massive organ. It's the biggest organ of the body. It's full of tiny little holes, the pores that let sweat come out. It can also let stuff go in. That's why you can rub a cream on and it has an effect, because stuff can go in, right? Yep. If stuff didn't go in, there'd be no point rubbing anything on your skin, because it would have no effect. So when you put the plastic fabric over the skin, it's a little bit like you're just choking your skin out. Like, if you think about the best image for it is when you see somebody put a plastic bag over their face and try to breathe, and their mouth will open, they'll be like sucking, but nothing's going in. That's what your skin is doing under polyester. And then when it can't breathe, then it opens up even more, because it's like, I really want to breathe here, but it can't. And so that means that the pores are more open for stuff to go in. So the sweat comes out, can't get through because they don't wick moisture away. So you get like a sweaty layer underneath. Sweat comes out, obviously the sleeves and the bottom and everything like that. You get sweat all over you, obviously, but it doesn't get out well. So you don't have the heat exchange. Your skin is trying to exchange heat with the environment through the sweat process. That just gets shut down. And that has a flow-on effect. It makes you run a little bit hotter. Like, I'm pretty confident that I could say that if you could hook athletes up to some kind of monitoring to check their core temperature or in temperature at the skin, for example, wearing polyester versus natural, you'll find that the polyester person will run, or if you took the same person and tested them, obviously, with the two things, so you got a clear example, they would run hotter wearing polyester. And so I feel like I'm just running around in circles with this, but there's like, we went, petrochemical. I got lost. So when if you're gonna, sorry, I've lost my train of thought.
That's okay. Yeah, like I think
prompt me.
Well, a good analogy would almost be to think about it like, if you think about and I think a good way to think about hemp fiber as an example is old paintings, they're painted on canvas.
Yes.
Yeah, well, canvas is originally made from cannabis. That's
yeah,
why it's called canvas,
that's
right?
correct.
And so when you think about a material like that, and some people might have like canvas bags or something like that. Canvas as a material, you know, you can see it's like it has that porous feel to it.
Yes.
Right. And so, you know, I guess from that perspective, you know, it's quite easy to see that kind of a comparison. Whereas if you think about polyester and you think about, you know, like those plastic sleeves that you put
Yes.
papers in.
Yes.
Right. And you take that material and then you extrude that into a thread, like a thin thread that is then knitted together.
Yes.
Well, you know, if you were to go and take that plastic sleeve, or like even if you take Glad wrap, you know, and you wrap it around your tummy.
Yeah, we've
you know,
done this.
People's old tricks to try and, you know, make that part of their body sweat, right?
Yeah,
like when really all it's doing is it's suffocating your pores. That's why they're opening up to try and to breathe, right?
Yes.
That's probably a good analogy to sort of look at. Okay, well, yeah, like even if you just take that as an example and think about, you know, how your skin would react to those materials. If you were to wrap your tummy in canvas, it would be just like wearing a shirt.
Yeah.
If you were to wrap your tummy in cling wrap, well, you know straight away that hey, that's going to create a bit of a difference, right?
Yeah. We did a little thing a little while back where we did exactly that. My partner, like I just took my shirt off. She wrapped me in Glad wrap around all of the areas where you would be wearing a rash guard. It was disgusting. Like, you know, within 30 seconds, I was like, oh man, I want to take this off. But then we made some videos of me dressed like that just to make fun of the whole plastic thing. But yeah, it is like that.
Yeah. And then from a health perspective, right? So when your pores do open up, like, is there any leaching of that plastic onto your skin, or like, you know, because we talk about this, it's a common thing for people to talk about it with water bottles. You know, like you look at a plastic water bottle, and you don't really think about it. Most people don't think about it until they get made aware of it. But then, if you know, that's why if you have a plastic water bottle, let's say you've left it in the car, and then you go and drink water from it, it tastes like shit. Like, let's be real. Like you can taste like the water has changed, right? Especially if it's been in a hot day.
Correct.
The sunlight's been smashing that water bottle.
Yeah.
And what's happened is the plastic's heated up and some of those chemicals have leached into the water.
Correct.
And so it's not a good thing if you were to drink that water.
No.
Right? But yeah, thinking about your endocrine system and your skin, is there any, like, from the research that you've done, does that mean that like there are chemicals that are leaching into your skin as well?
Yeah, there's actually studies. So there are studies into that exact thing. So there are two things. The first one is that, as we've said, it's a petrochemical product, so it's made using a lot of chemicals. You know, I've seen numbers kind of thrown around that it's thousands of chemicals. I don't know how many chemicals, because they don't have to tell you. Like, it's not like food where they are obliged to put the ingredients on the packet. This is not like that.
Yeah.
There's no obligation for them to tell you what is in there. You know, you have to just discover it or test it for yourself. And so people do that. And it is known that there are multiple what are called endocrine disrupting chemicals in the production of plastics. And then they soak the plastic fabrics in more chemicals to do things like flame retardant, because it would catch fire really easy if you didn't. Like, it would literally just
burn up.
If
like
you
plastic,
were wearing one that didn't have flame retardant on it, and I was smoking and my cigarette touched you, you would go up in flames.
Really?
Yeah, it's petrochemical. You know,
True.
It comes from the same place as gasoline.
Yep.
So they soak it in flame retardants. They soak it in antimicrobial agents, because they want to be able to say that it's antimicrobial, but the antimicrobial chemical is poisonous. They also put anti-wrinkle things on it to make it non-wrinkly. There's more things that they treat it with. And so those chemicals are able to leach out. So this is definitely known now. There's studies into it, that the chemicals, especially when it gets warm, so this is why it's so bad for jiu-jitsu. It's like you get hot and sweaty. So in the presence of warmth and moisture, the chemicals will be mobilized out of the plastic. And so then they will mingle with your sweat. And when the pores are like really open like that, undoubtedly some of those chemicals are going through. And the other thing is that you get the tiny microscopic pieces of plastic that are coming off the clothing all the time. So these the common term is microplastics, but in fact there's kind of like a new term, nanoplastics, for things that are smaller. And so the fibers that break off of the polyester fabrics would be nanoplastics. They're very, very small. You can't see them, but they can pass through the skin. They're so small that they can actually go through the pores of your skin as well. Although, to be honest, that is less common way for them to enter, but you are definitely eating them, drinking them, and breathing them because they're in your food, your water, and they're in the air. They're in the air in here right now. You just can't see it. And so we're exposed to that all the time. And so what we're saying is, train in natural stuff, so you're just exposed to it a bit less. It's like you can't eliminate all, like the world is full of toxic stuff. Like there's just no doubt about it. It's becoming more and more known how many aspects of daily life are toxic. You just fix the ones that you can. Like some things you might not be able to get rid of. If you live in the city, maybe you can't avoid the fumes from cars, but you could replace the polyester clothing that you have when it wears out. I don't suggest that you just throw all your gear away necessarily. Like if you got stuff, like use it up, but when you replace it, make a better choice. Like we just kind of treat it like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that comes down to an awareness thing. Being aware that there are other choices, right?
Correct. Yeah. Well, there wasn't before. I mean, as far as we're aware, I check this every now and then by just doing a little bit of Google searching. And, the last time I checked, which was not that long ago, we're still the only ones making natural fiber no-gi gear. We are the only place where you can get a natural rash guard and natural shorts. There's other people doing hemp gis. The gis is probably a little bit less of a thing. It's more of a novelty. I mean, they're lovely gis. They're amazing and we love them. But definitely the no-gi gear is where it's at because there's so much more of a difference between the natural gear and the polyester versus our nice expensive hemp gear and a cheaper cotton one. It's like cotton's not too bad. It's just ours are more comfortable.
Yeah. So then, from that perspective, when you think about like there's so many gyms out there that they organize gear that they want to sell as merchandise for their members and provide that to their members. Like,
yes.
Are you guys open to wholesale opportunities? Like, how would that work? Do people get in touch and ask you for that sort of stuff?
Yeah, we get inquiries. We're doing our first collaboration right at the moment with a gym up north. A friend of ours has a no-gi gym, and so we're doing a hemp rash guard with them. That's the first one. We've had a few other inquiries, but I think that there's probably a couple of things that turn people off. One is that our gear is a little bit more expensive, not massively, but a little bit, and we generally talk in larger minimum numbers than probably what they can get if they just go with plastic stuff. There's, that because like the plastic gear is just kind of like rolling off a production line, like they're just churning those things out, stamping people's designs on them. Like it's super simple what they do. And whereas our process takes, 3 times as long because of the steps in the process, and it costs a little bit more. And I think that a lot of people can't be bothered, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
Like they maybe they've heard about it. They go, oh, that'd be cool. But then when they realize the reality, I was like, they've got enough other things going. Like you imagine what it's like to run a jits club.
Of course, yeah.
Like there's a lot of things to consider and do and think about and build a membership. So it's like easily just throwing some, mainstream gear in the mix with your name on it is something that you can probably do quite easily. But dealing with the process that we do and the time frames, I think, you got to care about it a bit.
Yeah.
Like that's the only reason we are doing this is because we really give a shit about it. And so we go through the hoops. Like we just jump through the hoops and make it happen. And, you can just thank us by buying something.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think
but it really, it is more of a process. And, but yeah, we just suck it up and do it because like we wouldn't be doing this if it was, we wouldn't be doing this if we were just making regular stuff with polyester and that. We just literally, it'd be like, no, there's thousands and thousands of fightwear companies. I know now because you see them when you're in the game, you get shown them all the time. Like if you go on Instagram and go, oh, there's another one. There's another one.
They're all popping up.
Some athlete sponsored by some obscure little business that's probably about as big as ours, but we wouldn't be doing that. Like we literally just wouldn't be doing it.
So, and I think another interesting point, we spoke about this before, but just in relation to, because that was one of the things I was asking was like, if people want to do custom designs and things like that. And I was talking about, I'm guessing with most standard rash guards, they're probably just sublimation printed.
They are.
So for people that aren't aware what that process is, it's like it's kind of like almost like heat pressing the ink onto the fabric.
Correct.
To set the design.
Yes.
And I wasn't aware of this, but that process you can't actually do with your hemp fiber or hemp cotton rash guards, right?
Not in the same way. We're sort of becoming aware that there might be some digital printing options available to us. We're kind of exploring, having a bit of a look at other possible ways to create the look, but in the beginning, and also to be honest with you, like, so that the last lot of rash guards we did, which were the colours of the IBJJF ranks, we did though. That's the fanciest kind of rash guards we've done, and like we probably won't do anything that fancy again, but for a couple of reasons. But the main one is that actually it seems like the majority of people like simple things. Like they don't actually care about. Like I don't quite understand. You do see people in like polyester gear with like pictures, like they got huge designs and that all over them.
Spider-Man costumes.
Yeah, exactly. But like, and maybe it's just a function of the kind of person who would buy our gear. But I'm going to say that the majority just wants something real clean and simple. Because even when we put out what we think is quite a simple design, someone will go, "Oh, you got anything that doesn't have so much stuff on it?" It's like, dude, like all it's got is our name on it. Like, what do you want us to take that off too? But yeah, people like simple stuff. So we've sort of gone through a bit of a process of figuring out, we can get to there, we can do something that looks that fancy. But now we're definitely, the next releases that you'll see in rash guards are back to simple. And I reckon we'll probably stick with that. And we do simple by embroidering them, because the embroidery is permanent. It's going to last as long as the shirt. It'll still be perfect when the shirt's broken. And so I reckon we'll just stick with that for now. It's sort of almost become a little bit of a signature of what we do. So I reckon, we'll go with that.
Yeah. It's a nice little touch too. Embroidery always looks a little bit special in comparison to just a print, right? Yeah.
Well, the problem with printing, like, because you can't sublimate, if you screen printed, it would just fall off. It's a stretchy fabric. When it pulls and stretches, it'll crack and flake, and it'll just be gone quite quickly. I think somebody told me that a major brand had moved to screen printing on their rash guards, and it was like, it's such a stupid idea. I was like, yeah, it is.
All right. So on that note, I guess if people want to reach out, it's alchemicalfightwear.com.au.
Well, it's just alchemical.
Alchemical. Okay.
.com.au.
Yep.
Yeah. That's the shop which covers all of the clothing and also the health side of things. The shop is like split into sections there. We've just had our website done up, and it's super user friendly. Like, I go on there and I can find my way around. So if I can find my way around, anybody can.
Okay.
Because I'm not very good at that.
And then, what's the handle on Instagram?
Alchemical Fightwear.
Alchemical Fightwear. There we go. See, I had one of them right.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. We'll leave it there unless there's anything else you want to add.
No, that's it.
All right. Hope you guys enjoyed that one. And thank you.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it was a pleasure.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.